What about the black dating app called Black?
Oh, it's funny. I never used that one, bro. But hey, man.
I mean, hey, bro, if you want to date a bunch of Shaniquas, go for it, man.
LaQuisha.
Yeah, like me and Fresh aren't really down with the brown like that.
Man.
We ain't night riders.
Nah,
so
bro, I'm good.
You know, sometimes if they're, you know, red bone, but like in general, me and Fresh don't dabble in the dark, if you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
Move aside, sir. Order your man to step aside or there will be violence.
I choose violence. Please tell His High Holiness he's always welcome to visit.
Listening to Reset Race, you now tuned in to Reset Race. You're listening to Reset Race, you're now tuned in to Reset Race. What? Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Back on the grill again. We grilling them. You're listening to Reset Race. ADOS need reparations to make America great. You're tuned in to Reset Race. We no longer starving while others eat off our plate. No. You're listening to Reset Race. We focused on our justice claim. We know what is at stake. You're tuned in to Reset Race. You'll find out who really about justice and really who fake. Lineage go back to US Southern plantations. Lineage, Jim Crow and mass incarceration. Redlining lynchings. We are old from this nation. You're not about justice if you ain't for reparations. MG the wise one. Cousin mother intellectual. Samantha bringing fire. Anti-black. We pressing you. No permanent friends and no permanent enemies. The backbone of the country. To win, you need our energy. You gon' see. Listening to Reset Race. You now tuned in to Reset Race. You're listening to Reset Race. You're now tuned in to Reset Race. Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Put them back on the grill again. We grilling them. Back on the grill again. We grilling them. You're listening to Reset Race. ADOS need reparations to make America great. You're tuned in to Reset Race. We no longer starving while others eat off our plate. No. You're listening to Reset Race. We focused on our justice claim. We know what is at stake. You're tuned in to Reset Race. You'll find out who really about justice and really who fake.
Welcome to Reset Race. We are back from 2022, and this is gonna be our first. This is our first recording that we have done this year that we'll be releasing, because the other video was from last year because we still had a backlog. So my motto for 2022 is Cersei's I choose violence. So if y'all want to get out here and want to talk crazy about my people, I'm gonna get out here and talk crazy as fuck about yours. And we're gonna have discussions and issues, and we're gonna put this in. Dang, I say the F word every time within like the first 2 minutes. Thank God we don't monetize around this piece. So
Reset Race.
Telling you. So here we are. We're gonna have our guest Alma coming in a minute once he gets his his technology together. And we're going to go ahead and get John going. Come on, John.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? My name is John C. I'm an average American Negro, a co-host of Reset Race, and just overall great human being. But Happy to be here. Everybody get into this video. What's this, Fresh and Fit? Yeah, they had some choice words to say about Black Americans. So we going to have to address this. But as always, I'm happy to be here. It's always a pleasure. And let's get to the show, y'all. Let's do it. Do some grilling.
All right. They call me Mud. You can find me on my social media at of Lineage. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Clubhouse. Bitter Dose TV coming soon. Let's get into it.
When this whole thing happened, in the media sphere, a lot of people who
sorry for the rant, by the way, but
no, great. I love rants. But you guys probably saw a lot of different podcast hosts. They all put up statements, or they pretty much like disavowed you guys, right? And I had personal conversations with a bunch of them, like on the phone, like kind of like trying to bridge the gap a little bit. And one thing I noticed, and to really talk about, like as you said, the victim mindset, right?
Yeah.
I'm a first generation American. Right? So I was born in Jamaica.
Same.
You are too.
I was born in the United States, but yeah, my parents first generation.
But yeah, okay. So like your parents, what you saw in the household was probably more powerful than what you saw in your community.
Facts.
Because you saw them come over here, and it's called the bootstrap theory, which basically you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and the excuses you don't let hold you down.
Yep.
Right? I was explaining to someone, and I'm like, yo, listen, I know the race conversation is very complex, but you also have to understand why they would have the mentality that they have. Because honestly, when I came from Jamaica to here, we didn't really have much. Honestly, I came over here, and when the reality hit, I was like, damn, I had it better over there. Now, granted, now all these resources, but it was 5 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. We at least had a room per person in Jamaica. Now, it was much more opportunities here, but we realized real quickly, no handouts. You got to work for everything. And there was no excuse to be made other than you're either going to do it or not. And then if you didn't do it, you couldn't. And also, here's the thing. Because we're immigrants, we couldn't rely on the system a lot. Okay, well, we failed, so give us money. Or we failed, so give us this. So we just had to do it. So the conversation I had with this guy is like, yo, listen, you first generation, and I'm going to lump us 3 into this, right?
Yeah.
And this is why, I started to have a conversation with this person, and it felt like they were attacking me afterwards.
Of course.
Because I was saying, when we come from a different country, the mentality is different.
Yeah.
And the person basically said, well, number one, no matter what country you came from, they probably had some of the same stuff we had here in terms of slavery, this and third. But the psyche of the people here, and I was talking about like some very subtle differences. I'm like, you know why I don't even see racism as the biggest obstacle? I see me being lazy as the biggest obstacle.
Yeah.
You know why? I come from a country, and as it speaks to psyche, people who look like me are on the money from where I come from. Like, we're the majority there. Like, I'm not born in a cycle where it's like, hey, listen, yo, you're destined to lose. You're destined to lose. Like, you're black, so you pretty much, you have you're behind the whole.
I know he's trying to get in here, but can we have a conversation about nobody's talking about all the shit that's been stolen from us? We built shit. We built towns. We built wealth. White people took that shit back. That is in our grandparents' generation. A lot of these things that happen are our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generation. This is shit that we would have right now.
The mortgages were so favorable on a 30-year amortization basis that these families could pay less in their monthly housing charges than they had been paying for rent in public housing before they were subsidized to move into these developments. And this is how the suburbanization of the country occurred on an all-white basis. There were many returning war veterans, African Americans, who could have afforded those homes. They were modest, inexpensive homes. Levittown, for example, and these other developments I've been talking about, were typically 750, 800 square feet. They sold at the time for $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a piece. In today's inflation-adjusted dollars, that's about $100,000. Any working-class family can afford to buy a home for $100,000. It's less than twice national median income, with a 30-year amortized mortgage, and for returning war veterans, no down payment. But only whites were permitted to do so. African Americans were required to continue living in urban areas, renting apartments, either in public housing or in the private sector. These homes that were purchased by white families with federal subsidy over the next couple of generations gained in value, as you all know. You can't buy a home in these suburbs today for $100,000. They now sell for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, frequently much more. Unaffordable to working class families of any race, of either race. 6, 7 times national median income now. The white families who were subsidized by the federal government on an explicitly racial basis to buy these homes gained, as these houses gained in value, equity, wealth from the appreciation of the value of their homes. They used that wealth to send their children to college, to weather medical or emergencies or maybe temporary unemployment bouts. They used it to subsidize their own retirements, and they used it to bequeath wealth to their children and grandchildren, who then had down payments for their own homes that were otherwise would have been unaffordable to them. African Americans, who are prohibited from participating in this racially explicit wealth-generating program, continued to live in urban areas, as I say, and rented apartments. The result is that today, African American incomes, on average, are about 60% of white incomes. There's a whole other story about government policy that created that income gap. I won't keep you here for another few hours telling you that story. It's a different lecture. African American incomes are 60% of white incomes. African American wealth is only 10% of white wealth. And whatever the reasons for the 60% ratio is, that enormous disparity between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is entirely attributable to unconstitutional federal housing policy that was practiced in the mid-20th century, that we, all of us as American citizens, have an obligation to remedy and that we've never even attempted to remedy. It's not that we've tried to remedy racial segregation in neighborhoods and failed. We've never even tried. As I said, the civil rights movement abandoned the effort of desegregation at the end of the 1960s. Well, there were many, many other policies besides the three that I focused on. One is the use of police-protected violence to drive African Americans out of white neighborhoods. The use of public housing to create patterns of segregation. The Federal Housing Administration's subsidization of white home ownership in suburban areas. Many other policies in addition to those three that federal, state, and local governments utilized to create segregation, or sometimes to reinforce informal segregation that already existed. It would have been so easy to have a different history.
They're validating this whole bootstrapper idea when, you know, Martin Luther King already dispelled the myth around that bullshit where, you know, basically, how the fuck you gonna tell a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps?
What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.